the news overnight that the Pentagon will review the AUKUS defence tie-up between the US, the UK and Australia will send a shockwave through Australia's defence forces and contractors who supply it. The news came from the US Undersecretary of Defence for Policy, Elbridge Colby, who previously raised doubts about the project worth a reported $300 billion.
I think AUKUS is really important. It's really valuable. I think the question will be in the implementation. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts because it would be great if there are more American submarines, more Australian submarines that are more highly capable. That is a win-win, but we can't sort of take it for granted and pocket the gains like we've already achieved that.
But this review of AUKUS raises doubts for local defence contractors who already are gearing up. Steve Baxter is a former Queensland chief entrepreneur who's launched a defence technology fund called Beaton Zone Venture Partners, and he joins me now. Steve, many thanks for your time. Many of those that you have investigated, many of those that you have invested in, quite clearly could be affected if AUKUS changes in any considerable way.
Yeah, thanks very much, Ross. The news overnight was obviously something we weren't expecting. There's been a lot of talk lately regarding the relative levels of spending between Australia and the US, and one part of me thinks it could be part of that negotiation. Needless to say, that AUKUS Pillar 1 is what we're talking about here. Most of the businesses that we deal with in Australia are solely in sort of AUKUS Pillar 2, which is more about high-tech warfare, which is generally not submarine warfare. So mostly unaffected. I'm hoping this is part of a larger negotiations over the Australian defence budget. That would be a lot nicer than obviously the more black armband view, to say the least.
I was talking to somebody in the defence industry last week who told me that nobody ever lost their job by investing in US military hardware in our defence forces. In other words, it's the safest bet is simply to buy American, no matter what cost. The question is whether that discriminates against Australian defence contractors who might struggle to otherwise get contracts here in Australia.
Yeah, look, the difference between the market's interesting. The US is a bigger market. They spend roughly $1 trillion US every year on defence. We spend $35 billion US a year on defence. There's a lot of debate at the moment over whether that should be the 2% or 3% or 3.5%. We do need to spend more if we are to be a good ally to the US. All this is about, us acquiring reasonably large capital assets, being submarines, which I think is a great idea. The timeframes are at issue. We've seen demonstrations in the last couple of weeks that large capital assets are a highly risky thing to own, and I'm referring here to the Ukrainian attacks on the Russian strategic bomber force. Given that, and given the I suppose the challenges in security being faced coming up, there was a US Navy Admiral Paro has talked about the defence of Taiwan as being the Taiwan Straits being turned into an unmanned hellscape. This is a reference to smaller systems such as drones, sea drones, naval drones, and the like being used to defend that island. So, as an interim, if there are issues here, and something that's far more pertinent to the Australian defence industrial base would be, why don't we replace this capability gap, if it exists and if it comes off, with something like a drone capability, in this case a nautical drone, something a little more innovative, a little more towards the way that the future direction of warfare seems to be going.
But I get that. But the issue that I hear from defence contractors is we have the technology here. I mean, you look at some of the attacks, some of the drone attacks in Ukraine, for example, that can be powered by Australian software. And indeed, we have significant drone technology here in Australia. The real issue is the reluctance of the Australian Defence Forces to buy that technology unless it goes to America and literally comes back here to Australia. What I wonder is whether all the smarts we have in this space that you're backing actually has a chance of being picked up by the Australian Defence Forces.
The Australian Defence Force is a very, very, very small budget. We don't rate the Australian Defence Forces as a big customer. The businesses that we invest in at Beaton Zone Venture Partners attack large customers. We take on the US, we take on Europe. US spends $1 trillion. The Europeans are about to spend $500 billion. Those systems are also easier to sell into. They're not easy, they're just easier. So look, the Australian Defence Force is a difficult customer, to be honest. And yes, we do have amazing capability here. There is one, sticking with the submarine theme, there's one system out of Melbourne called C2 Robotics. They make an amazing underwater drone. You should have them on your show, Ross. They are fantastic. And these, I'm unaware of how much they have been picked up by the Australian Defence Force, but I think it would be a really good case study to understand why aren't we using this locally developed technology for for our own problems here.
Because, to your point, given the fact that if AUKUS is under review, then Australia needs to become more self-reliant potentially into the future. If that's really where Donald Trump goes to with, the US supplies around the world, then I sense that Australia has got to start to look inwards to the technology we already have, rather than consistently looking to the United States.
Yeah, very much so. We have amazing technology. I've been on the road on this journey of investing in sovereign defence businesses now for 2 years, and the one absolute pleasure that I've had in this journey is to discover how much great stuff is here. We have amazing capability here. We need the business courage inside the Australian Defence Force to acquire it, knowing that and acquire it, getting our soldiers, sailors, and aircrew to use it. So we have it here. We could fill. If we are talking about gaps in defence budgets, we could rapidly fill a gap in the defence budget by incentivising sovereign purchases of equipment. So it is here. It does require courage. And it does require a defence budget to move. I mean, we're not going to do this on 2 point something of defence. Unless defence budget starts with a 3, we'll constantly have these arguments.
I'll tell you what, it is always good to have you in the program, Steve. Really appreciate it today. No doubt we'll be in touch very shortly. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Ross.